Hello and welcome back, future scientists. I'm Mr. K with Mississippi Public Broadcasting, and we're going to continue our lesson today talking about genetics. Okay, today we're getting a little more complicated because we're talking about some complex inheritance patterns, okay? So we're going to be working with something called multiple alleles and sex-linked traits, okay? These are a little more complicated than the classic Mendelian inheritance when you're just dealing with two types of alleles and they're dominant and recessive, okay? So thank you for making it here today. Sit back, relax, try your best to follow along. I'm going to go through and introduce these, and then I've got some practice questions we'll do at the end. So again, thank you so much for making it, and let's go ahead and hop into it and see what we're talking about today. So first of all, I wanted to draw your attention to the board up here. Okay, what we're looking at is something called multiple alleles. What's going on here is that if a trait is controlled by more than two alleles, that's going to make it where there's a lot of possible phenotypes. Okay, an example of this that I'll show you here in just a second is human blood typing. Okay, that next bullet point is talking about something called polygenetic traits. Okay, let's break that word down real quick. Okay, so that prefix poly means many, and so what's going on here is that some traits are controlled by a lot of genes. Okay, things that have a wide range of phenotypes are often polygenetic traits. So I've got two examples that I wanted to talk to you about. Okay, so one is human height. Okay, so look around the classroom right now, you would see that you've got people of all different types of heights, right? Probably from 5 foot all the way up to 6 feet, maybe even 6'1" or 6'2", something like that, if you got a tall basketball player in the room with you. So there's not just two flavors of height, right? You're not just tall or short, you have all of these intermediate heights in between. Okay, the reason for that is that these are controlled by many genes. Okay, this trait, your height, is controlled by many genes. The more dominant alleles you have, the taller you're going to be, and the more recessive alleles you have, the shorter you're going to be. Another example of this is complexion or skin color in humans. Okay, I know sometimes we just think of people as either having white or black skin, but there's actually a lot of different shades of skin color in between those two. You know, for white people, you can have an olive skin tone, or you can be like me where I'm kind of white, but there's also some red in there. And then even for people with a darker complexion, you can have really, really dark skin, or you can have lighter shades of skin. So there's a lot of different colors when it comes to our skin tone. Okay, and this is another example of a polygenetic trait. The more recessive alleles you have, the whiter your skin's going to be. In fact, if you have all recessive alleles, you can have a condition called being an albino or albinism, which is when your skin makes no melanin. And then the more dominant traits you have, the darker your skin's going to be. So there's a wide range of height and skin color, and this is because they're controlled by multiple genes. They're not just one gene like those Mendelian inheritance patterns we've been talking about. Okay, and then the last one that we're going to talk about here is we'll get into something called sex-linked traits here in just a little bit. Okay, so let's go ahead and hop into this and see what we got going on. Okay, so I wanted to talk about multiple alleles and codominance. And an example of this is our blood type. Okay, for blood type, there's actually 3 alleles that we're dealing with. We can deal with the A-type allele, the B-type allele, or the recessive allele, which would code for a O-type blood. Okay, the A and the B are both codominant. So that means if you have an allele for A-type blood and an allele for B-type blood, then your blood type would be AB. Okay, if you have neither of those alleles, if you don't have the allele for A, if you don't have the allele for B, then you would have O-type blood. Okay, and so because there's actually 3 alleles here, there's multiple different types of blood type that you can have. You can be type A, type B, type AB, and type O. Okay, so this is an example of multiple alleles. There's 3 alleles in your blood type, and then they're also codominant. The A and the B are codominant, and that O type is recessive to all of them, okay? And we'll look at some examples of this towards the end of the class, okay? So another type of inheritance pattern I wanted to talk about is something called epistasis. And what's going on here is if you look at these mice, there's kind of two genes that are controlling the color of these mice. So you can have, if you look at the side there, we've got big B and little b. The big B stands for black fur and the little b stands for brown fur. Okay, so those kind of work just like your typical dominant and recessive one. But in epistasis, what's going on is that a gene at one locus alters the expression of a gene at another locus. So what's going on here is that not only do you have a trait or an allele, a gene for color of fur, but you also have a gene for whether you're going to be pigmented or not. And that's what those C's over there are standing for. So if you have a capital C, that means that you're going to show some color. It can be black or brown. If you are totally recessive for the pigmentation gene, so if you have two little c's, you're going to be white regardless of what those other alleles are. Whether you have a capital B or a lowercase b, it's not going to matter, because if you are little c, your genes are telling your body not to make any pigments, and so you're just going to be white. And so if you look at this picture down here, I'll just kind of walk through this with you real quick. All four of these are albino, which means there's no pigments coming on here, okay? All four of these, what they have in common is that they have two recessive alleles for the pigmentation, and that stands for colorless. And so all four of these, their body's not making any melanin, it's not making any color, and so they appear white. That's what being an albino is when your body makes no melanin. So their fur is white, their eyes don't have any pigment, that's what kind of gives it that red color sometimes. But what I wanted to point out is all four of these have the recessive pigmentation gene, but their first two letters are different. So if you look real closely, this one's heterozygous, this one's homozygous dominant, this one's homozygous recessive. So it doesn't matter what these letters are. If you have two little c's, you're going to be white, okay? And then up here, all of these are showing some kind of color. They're showing brown or black, and that's because they have at least one of these capital C's. Because of that, their color shows through, and we can figure out what color they are based off of their genes. Because these three are all homozygous recessive, they're brown. All these other black mice up here, they have at least one capital B, so they're showing that dominant trait, which is black. Okay, so that's epistasis, okay? And then I wanted to review something with you as well. The last thing we're going to talk about today is an inheritance pattern called sex-linked traits. Okay, what's going on here, these don't have to do with your gender specifically, it's just really dealing with the sex chromosomes. And so as a little review here, men, when it comes to our sex chromosomes, we have an X and a Y chromosome, and females have two X chromosomes. A little mnemonic device that I like to tell people is, if you have a Y, you're a guy. That's an easy way to remember what the sex chromosomes are for the different genders. So males are XY and females are XX. Okay, so these chromosomes, the X and the Y chromosomes, those determine your sex, so genes located on these chromosomes are known as sex-linked genes. Okay, let's get into a little bit more detail on what's going on here. Okay, so you might remember, we talked about this a long time ago, the X chromosome is much larger than the Y chromosome. So it carries more genes than the Y chromosome does. Because the X chromosome is bigger, more genes fits on there. Okay? Disorders that are sex-linked are much more common in males because they would only need one recessive allele to have the trait rather than two recessive alleles that the females need. So an example of these sex-linked traits is like color blindness, okay? The gene for having normal vision is on the X chromosome, okay? Well, women have two X chromosomes, so they're more likely to have that normal vision, okay? Because they need two recessive alleles in order to be colorblind. Men, because I only have one X chromosome, I'm a guy, so I'm XY, okay? But the allele for color vision is on the X chromosome. So I only have one chance at getting that normal vision. If I happen to get a recessive allele, then I'm going to be colorblind. So if you were to do a test or to poll a lot of people, you would find that as far as color blindness goes, men are much more likely to be colorblind than women. And that's because men only have one X chromosome. That's where the color blindness gene is, and so you're more likely to get one recessive allele than you are to get two. And again, we'll kind of look at this as we get into the review part of the lesson today, okay? So great work, y'all. I have a little worksheet I wanted to do. Teacher, if you could go ahead and pass that out. Why don't y'all take about 10 minutes, just give it your best shot, see what you can come up with, okay? And then anything that you're a little confused on, I'm gonna go over the worksheet here in just a little bit, and so if you're confused on anything, I'll clear it up then. So go ahead and pause the video, take 10 minutes, y'all see what y'all can come up with, and then I'll do it on the board up here in just a little bit. All right, hopefully that didn't give y'all any problem, but some of this stuff can be a little tricky, so I wanted to make sure I reviewed this with y'all, okay? So if any of this is giving y'all any problems, just make sure you're following along with me, and I'm gonna clear all of that up right now. So let's go ahead and get into this and see what's going on. Okay, so here's the first question, okay? This is dealing with multiple alleles, okay? So what it says here is that in rabbits, multiple alleles control fur color. The alleles are listed from most dominant to least dominant in the table below, okay? So you can see here we've got, we usually just have two alleles, right, when we're working with these kind of problems. Here we have 4 alleles, okay? And some of them are more dominant than others. So this wild type, what this means, wild type, that's just the most common form of a phenotype. So whatever the wild type is probably just like a brown colored fur. Okay, so this is the most dominant, and then as we work our way down this table, they get less and less dominant. So the chinchillan is dominant over these two, the Himalayan is dominant over the albino, and the albino is totally recessive. So here's what it wants us to do. It says describe the phenotype of the following genotypes. So these are our genotypes. We have to pick what, we're going to use these words for number 1 and write them in the lines below, okay? So the first one here, number 1, is a capital C and then a little c. Here's the capital C, here's the little c. Because that top one is the most dominant, the phenotype here is going to be the wild type. Wild type just means whatever's most common out in nature, okay? All right, let's look at number 2. This is little c, okay? Well, the allele for little c is the albino. It's the most recessive. And because this one has 2 recessive alleles, the phenotype here is going to be albino. So we'll write albino for this one. Okay, great job. Let's keep it going. So the next one is C, CH, CH. Okay, I know those are kind of confusing, but what's going on here is this first allele is the chinchillan, and the second allele is for the Himalayan. So we have to decide which one of those are going to show. Well, remember that the top part of the table is the most dominant, and then as we go down, they get less and less dominant. And so because I see that CCH, the color for this rabbit is going to be the chinchillan, okay? Okay, here's the last one. We got CHC. The CH is the Himalayan, and that recessive one is the albino. We'll see the Himalayan here because it's more dominant than the albino is. So let me write Himalayan here. Great. Okay, so now I think we'll get into actually crossing some of these. So this is where it can really get confusing. Okay, so it says complete the following cross. A homozygous chinchilla colored rabbit with a heterozygous Himalayan rabbit. Okay, so we know the full genotype of one of these. Because this says homozygous chinchilla, we'll know that we'll just use this allele twice. So let me go ahead and draw my Punnett square. And we'll start filling this in. All right. First thing we want to do is write our gametes. Well, we know the gametes for one parent. This homozygous chinchillan is going to look like this. Okay. Now this one is a little confusing because it says heterozygous Himalayan rabbit. Okay, this is the Himalayan, so we know what one of the gametes is going to be is this C and then the little h up top, but it says heterozygous. So that means that we don't really know what's going into this area, okay, but we know that it cannot be that CH because it says heterozygous, and you might remember heterozygous means different. So you kind of have to think of this. Which of these three, and I'll kind of delete some of this stuff so you can see what I'm talking about. Okay, so we're talking about a Himalayan, or sorry, we're talking about a heterozygous Himalayan rabbit. Okay, we know it can't be this one because it would have just said homozygous, right? So we have to pick one of these three. It could be this one, it could be this one, it could be this one. One of those three needs to go into this area for that other gamete. What is it? Well, it can't be either one of these two, okay? Because if it was that one, the rabbit wouldn't be Himalayan anymore. If that capital C was there, it would be a wild type rabbit. If the CCH was there, it would be a chinchillan rabbit. So the only thing that can go here is that little c, because that's the only combination. These two alleles is the only combination for a heterozygous Himalayan rabbit that would appear Himalayan, okay? So hopefully that makes sense, but once we have that filled out, we just kind of fill in our chart here, okay? I know these look super confusing because of all the way you write these alleles. Okay. Okay, so it says, what is the genotype of the Himalayan rabbit? Okay, so we figured that out. This is the phenotype of the Himalayan rabbit. Okay, and then it wants to know the genotypic ratio and the phenotypic ratio. All right, so for this one, I have that all of these are going to be chinchillan because they all have that chinchilla allele. So I'm circling that here. So you can see all four of those have the Himalayan, or sorry, the chinchillan allele. So all of these are going to look chinchillan. Okay, and then it says the phenotypic ratio. Sorry, let's reverse these actually. So down here, I'll write all chinchilla. Okay, and then for the genotypic ratio, we have two that are this combination, and we have two that are this combination. Great. All right, so that's our first one. This is why the multiple alleles can be kind of confusing because some of them are more dominant than others. So you kind of, solving these are like a puzzle sometimes. Okay, so just hang in there with me. We got a couple more to do, and I think that'll clear up any confusion that we're having. All right, so here's the next one. For number 8, what it wants us to do, it says a wild type colored rabbit is bred with a chinchillan colored rabbit. Some of the offspring have a Himalayan coat. And it wants to know what are the genotypes of the parents in this cross. So we actually don't have to fully complete the cross, but we will need to do it just so we can find out what the genotypes are. Okay, so let's look at what's going on here. So we got two parents. Okay, so let's look at this wild type colored rabbit, okay, and the chinchillan colored rabbit, okay? And then it says some of the offspring have a Himalayan coat. So we have to figure out what the genotypes of these parents are. Okay, well, when I see a wild type and a chinchillan colored rabbit, I already know what alleles each of them, I know what one allele each of them are going to have, right? So that one's talking about a wild colored rabbit. So I know the wild colored rabbit has to have that allele, right? Because that's the allele for wild color. And then I know that the other parent, it says chinchillan colored rabbit. Well, I know that they have to have at least one of those because that's the allele for chinchilla. So let's go ahead and write that down first. Okay, so I know one is like this, and then I know the other parent is like this. Okay, so now I have to, what are going to be the other allele for the parents here, right, where we can make a Himalayan coat. That's kind of what we have to figure out here, okay? So what I'm going to do is set up my Punnett square and start filling it in and see if I can find what their other allele is going to be, okay? So I know one is like this with a capital C, and then I know one is the chinchillin like this, okay? So I'm going to start filling in my Punnett square. Okay, and it's saying that some have a Himalayan coat. So that means we need to figure out what goes into this box that could be Himalayan, because these two are not going to produce Himalayan rabbits. Because if you look right here, Himalayan is less recessive than those two, right? So because if you come down here and look again, this is the wild type, this is the chinchillin, that's the wild type. Well, that means that none of these three can produce a Himalayan rabbit. But this box might, depending on what the genotypes of the parents are. So let me erase this box, and let's see if we can think of something that would produce a Himalayan rabbit. The allele for Himalayan rabbit is this. So what we can do is just put this one as the other allele for both parents. So let's see what would happen then. So I'm going to finish filling in my Punnett square here. Okay, so this is all working, because this parent up here, this could be their genotype and they would still be a wild colored rabbit. This would be the genotype of the other parent, and this combination would still produce a chinchillin colored rabbit, okay? And then this right here is going to produce our Himalayan rabbit. So we figured out what the genotypes of the parents are. They both have a Himalayan allele. If you got this, you're all good to go. And I would say there's actually one more combination. Either of the parents could have had a albino allele, and this would probably still work out just fine. So if you had one of them with the albino, as long as one of the parents has that Himalayan colored coat, you're fine and you've done this correctly. Okay, great. So let's move down. That's the multiple alleles. Now we're talking about sex-linked traits, okay? So for these, we're going to see a lot of X's and Y's. Okay, so what's going on here? It says color blindness is a result of a recessive allele on the X chromosome. You can see that the capital B is normal vision and the lowercase b is color blindness. It wants us to complete the following genotypes, and you can see here we've got woman, man, woman, man. Okay, well what I think we should do first is let's just go in and fill in the sex chromosomes first, right? So the first one is woman. What are the sex chromosomes for a woman? Well, you might remember that they're XX, right? And when we get to men, that's when we use XY, because if you have a Y, you're a guy. Okay, and now this one is woman, so she'll be XX as well. And then a man is going to be XY. So now we've already figured out the genotypes, the sex chromosomes. Now we're going to worry about whether they're colorblind or not. Okay, so this has a colorblind woman. Well, for this woman to be colorblind, she needs two of these recessive alleles. So that means that she's got two like this, okay? That's the only combination that would make a colorblind woman. Okay, this has a colorblind man. Well, for this one, because they're colorblind, we know that the X that they have has to have the colorblindness allele, okay? This Y doesn't get a letter at all because this gene for normal vision is not on the Y chromosome. So we just leave the Y chromosome blank like that. Okay, this has a heterozygous normal vision woman. So she's got normal vision, so she's got to have at least one capital letter, but it says heterozygous, so that means that her other letter is a lowercase b. Okay, and then this has a normal vision man. Well, we know that to have normal vision is the capital B. Okay, so he's got a capital B like this. So that's kind of how the sex chromosomes work, is you want to think about what are their sex chromosomes, and then you use the information
remember that for the sex-linked, the trait that we're tracking is always on the X chromosome. So you can kind of just ignore the Ys. Okay, I think we'll do some crosses with that, so let's see what's going on here. Okay, 10 says, a colorblind man and a normal vision woman have a son who is colorblind and a daughter who is colorblind. So now it wants us to fill in all of the genotypes for these individuals. Well, let's go ahead and do the sex chromosomes first. So I see father, so that would be XY. I see son, that would be XY. Okay, daughter is going to be 2 X's, and the mother is going to be 2 X's as well. Okay, so it says the father is colorblind. Okay, so what should we put here next to that X? Well, if he's colorblind, it's going to be a lowercase b. Okay, and then it says a son who is colorblind, so he's just like his dad. Okay, where it's X, little b, and then Y. Okay. Then it says, okay, so what's the genotype of the daughter? Okay, the daughter is also colorblind. So that means that she has to have 2 little b's. Okay, that's the only way that you can make a woman that would be colorblind, is to have 2 little b's on each of the X's there. Okay, so now the only place where it's kind of confusing is it says a normal vision woman. So we can figure out, as far as what the mother is, we know what one of her alleles are. We know that one of the alleles has to be a capital B, right? Because she has normal vision, so she's got the allele for normal vision, which is the capital B. Now we could do a whole Punnett square and figure it out, but here's what I want you to remember is that your traits, one of them comes from your mom and one of them comes from your dad. So we know that the dad only has this little b to give. That's where one of them came from. So where'd this other allele come from? Well, it had to come from mom, right? And so that means that mom's other allele is that little b. Okay, so here are all of the, I'll write them off to the side so you can see them a little bit better. Okay, and then the daughter is like this, and then the mother is like this. Okay, so those are the genotypes for all of the people in this family. Both of the males in this family are colorblind. They have a colorblind daughter, and the mom is heterozygous for colorblindness. Okay? Great. Okay, so we're looking at blood types. Here are the last couple of questions. So just hang in there with me. Y'all are doing great. Okay, so now we're dealing with blood types. Okay, so blood types are a result of multiple alleles with some of the alleles showing codominance. The alleles for blood types are as follows. So if you have, this is the allele for type A blood, this is the allele for type B blood, this is the allele for type O blood. These two are codominant. These two are codominant, and this allele is recessive. So the only way you can have O-type blood is if you have 2 of those little I's, okay? Because these are codominant with each other, if you have both of them like this, then you have a AB type blood, right? Because you have an A and a B. Okay, now when it comes to type A and type B blood, it's a little more confusing because there's actually 2 combinations that would make these blood types. So you can be homozygous dominant, which is like that, or you can be heterozygous, okay? And the same thing for the type B blood over here, you can be homozygous dominant, or you could be heterozygous, okay? So these are the allele combinations that make the blood types above them, okay? So keep that in mind as we move forward with these questions. Okay, it says, complete the following cross. A homozygous type A father and a heterozygous type B mother, okay? All right, so dad is homozygous for type A blood. Let me draw my Punnett square first. Okay, so dad is homozygous for type A blood, so that means this is his genotype. Okay, these would be the gametes that he can give. The mom is heterozygous for type B blood. So she has to have 1 capital B. That's the only way you would have type B blood. But because she's heterozygous, we're going to use the little I for her other gamete, okay? So let's start filling in our questions here. So it says, what is the genotype of the father? Well, we know that he's like this because he's heterozygous for type A. And the mom is, dad is homozygous. Mom is heterozygous, so she's like this. All right? Okay, and now we are going to fill in our Punnett square here. Okay, it says, what is the genotypic ratio of the offspring? Well, for the genotypic ratio, I see two combinations. I see this one and I see this one. Okay, so for this, we're going to write that we have two of those type AB and two, these would be type A blood. And then it says, what is the phenotypic ratio? All right, well, we have two with type AB blood, and we have two with type A blood, okay? So that's the genotypic ratio and the phenotypic ratio. All right, a couple more. So this says, 15 says, what are the possible blood types of offspring if a parent with heterozygous type A blood and a parent with heterozygous type B blood have a child? Okay, what are the possible blood types? Okay, so they're both heterozygous, okay? So we can, let me draw my Punnett square real quick and we'll fill this in, okay? So this is one, this is the other, and we just fill in our blood types now. Remember to always put the dominant allele first if you have it, and because these are type A and type B, we'll just always put the A first if we have it. Okay, so for this one, it wants to know what are the possible blood types of the offspring. So we're really dealing with phenotypes here. Well, this is going to have, we can really make any combination of blood types here. Okay, the children here can have type AB blood, that would be this one. The children can have type A blood, which would be this one. The child could have type B blood, which would be that one, or the child can have type O blood, which could be that one. So if a heterozygous type A and a heterozygous type B have a child, any blood type is possible. Okay? Here's 16. What are the possible genotypes of the offspring if one parent is homozygous for type A and the other parent is heterozygous for type B blood? All right, so let's see what that would look like. All right, so homozygous type A is like this, and the other one is heterozygous type B, so like this. All right, we'll fill in our chart. All right, it wants to know what the possible genotypes are. So for this one, we have two that are like this, and two that are like this. So those are the possible genotypes. The phenotypes for this one would be AB blood and type A blood. Okay? Great, here's the last one. If a person with type AB blood has a child with a person with blood type O, what are the possible blood types of their offspring? So for this one, notice that we've got AB type blood and O type blood, and it's not telling us if it's homozygous or heterozygous, but that's because if you remember, for these blood types, there's only one combination, right? So the type A person is going to have this, and the type O person is going to have this. So we don't need the words homozygous and heterozygous because there's only one combination that can make these blood types. So let's draw the Punnett square here, and we'll start filling it in. So here's the type AB person, here's the type O person, and then we'll fill in our charts. Alrighty, and it wants to know what are the possible blood types of the offspring. Well, we could have type A or type B. Okay, So y'all, I hope that cleared some things up. I know the multiple alleles and the blood typing stuff can be a little complicated, but if you hung in there with me and followed along, I think that might have cleared some of that up. So y'all, thank you so much for making it today. Your teacher has some other work for you to practice on, so make sure to give that your best effort, and I hope everybody has a great day.